Well, I'm really excited to have Amy Ard on the show and just really excited to be talking about your nonprofit, Motherhood Beyond Bars. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, just let's start out, Amy, by just telling us what Motherhood Beyond Bars does and why you started this in the first place.
Motherhood Beyond Bars exists to break cycles of incarceration in families. And the way we do that is we have multiple programs that get to this one issue. And to tell you how I landed on this mission, we need to go back in time a little bit because that's not where we started. We started delivering pregnancy and health education to incarcerated women. And it was through the course of doing that work, listening carefully to the women that we were working with, and just being really curious that we ended up expanding our programs and our mission. But that was a long process. That's not where we started.
So, talk to us about how you started then. Like, what made you want to get involved with this issue?
My story is not the beginning of Motherhood Beyond Bars. For 11 years, I was a childbirth doula. And I came to that work after having my first child and having a doula in the room with me. And even before she had left the room with me holding an hour-old child, I had decided that what I wanted to do when I grew up was to help other women feel the way she helped me feel. So I decided, holding this slippery little baby, that I was going to be a childbirth doula. And I did that for 11 years in Washington, D.C. and Georgia. And I was supporting a family that was giving birth in a downtown DC hospital. This was several hundred births in to my career as a doula. And I walked out into the hallway of this busy hospital to get my clients some ice chips. And when I opened up the door, in front of me in the hallway was a gurney. Someone had been brought in on an ambulance, and hanging from the side of the gurney was a pair of handcuffs. And that image stopped me in my tracks. It was everything wrong, I thought, with what I should be seeing on a labor and delivery floor in a hospital. And my brain was just trying to make sense of this image when the door of the room next to mine, the one I was working in, opened up, and a big man in a black uniform and a gun on his hip walked out. And I caught sight of a woman in the bed. Um, and it was the first time it had ever occurred to me that there could be women who were in prison or jail and pregnant and delivering a baby. And that moment was just as everything turned sideways for me because I had just left the room of a family that was paying me $1,300 to be present for their birth, to make sure that no matter what happened, even if the birth went a little sideways and they didn't get everything that they wanted, that there was someone there to support them and to help them make sense of it and to make them feel safe and secure and supported. And in the room next door, literally next door to that, there was a woman potentially chained to a bed with an armed guard by her side giving birth. And I decided that day, really, that if that was happening in the room next to mine, that I needed to change what I was doing. And there was a process from there, of course. I didn't quit my house and quit my job and sell my house the next day, but I did about a year later um, do all of those things. And my family and I moved back to Georgia, where I was from. It's the place I grew up, and I know more people in Atlanta, Georgia than anywhere who would be in a position to help me figure out how to solve the problem of pregnancy and birth and incarceration, and moved to Georgia, where I met some people here that were already working on the issue and got to work. So that's really the moment for me where things crystallized, and I realized that I needed to be part of the solution.
That's such a great story, Amy. And what I love about that story and what you did is I think so many times you see stuff like injustices in the world and we see them and then we don't act. But
Mhm.
you saw it and then acted. And like I'd never, until we met through the workshop, I'd never even thought about. Of course, there's women who give birth behind bars, but it's just not an issue you ever hear about,
Mhm.
and it's just nothing. You just don't even think about it. What do you think made you want to actually act versus just think about it, feel bad, and then go back to your doula business and life is normal. And, it's easy. Like maybe you could just write a donation to something versus start something or work on something.
I think there are a couple of things. One, I have always been accused of being someone who leaps and then looks. So I have maybe an impulse control problem. But it was also, I mean, I see injustices everywhere, every day. You drive downtown in Atlanta and you see people sleeping under the underpass. I am guilty of driving by those folks and not trying to come up with a solution to that problem. The convergence in this issue was something I was deeply invested in already, which was maternal health and supporting women who are in the process of giving birth, watching families pretty much come to life before my eyes in the birthing process. And I think I was uniquely positioned in that moment to say, I have skills, I have expertise, this is something I care about. And I leapt. I leapt knowing that I had something to bring to the issue. But I certainly, I never, I would never judge people for not making that leap. There was a unique set of circumstances that allowed me to do that. And I think importantly, I leapt knowing that I didn't have the answers. I didn't even the tip of the iceberg. I didn't understand the issue well enough to say I had a solution, but I was awfully curious and I put myself in a position to learn more quickly. And I think for people who see an injustice, feel like they have something that they can contribute to alleviate that injustice, the first step is to get really curious about that injustice before you try to come up with some solutions.
So what was that process like? How did you get curious on it?
I did a lot of reading first. I mean, I knew I had seen that woman in the room next to me, and I knew there were others like her, and I couldn't reach out and talk to that woman. I knew that she was kind of off limits. But I did start to do a lot of reading and just about criminal justice reform in the big picture. And that led me to finding out about some organizations that were already doing the work around the country. And um, and I and again, there was this move to Atlanta. There was finding a place where I knew I had connections and I could hit the ground running. So when I moved back to Georgia, I immediately started making connections with people who were doing that work and reaching out to people who had been formerly incarcerated and experienced childbirth while they were behind bars. And I was really lucky within a month or so of coming back here to pick up a phone call, make a cold call, really, to a woman who had just begun to tell her story about being pregnant and incarcerated, and tragically losing that child after falling because she was shackled while getting into a transport vehicle. She had just started to tell her story
Wow.
publicly. And I made contact with her, and we had a conversation that lasted for over an hour the first time we talked. And just together, we decided we were going to see where we could collaborate where we could. And that really kicked off a process of doing some legislative work to end shackling in Georgia. And through that process, met a lot of other people that were interested in the issue. And that brought me to Motherhood Beyond Bars.
Wow. There's so much there, going from looking at the problem and not just realizing probably other people are working on this issue. So finding out who those people are, diving into that, but then like picking up the phone and actually talking to someone who's experienced that, that's kind of scary things to do, like I imagine that was not an easy call to make, particularly with such a tragic story.
Oh, I was scared to death. Scared to death. But with about 10 minutes because I know I'm just a neophyte. I'm new to this work. Again, I think it is the sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn from others. Again, coming when I picked up the phone and called Pamela Wynn, and she is now very well known. She's a national leader on this issue. When I picked up the phone and called her, what I said was, I am new to this. I have moved back to Georgia to kind of dedicate time and energy to this. This is what I want to do. and tell me what you're doing and let me know how I can help. And again, it was coming to it with a real sense of curiosity and a willingness to build trust and not to come up with solutions to a problem that maybe other people have been thinking about a lot longer than you have.
And did you worry at all, like, that people wouldn't take you seriously, or you're just contacting these people, like, it's just your idea of getting to work on this? Like, how did you find people how receptive were people to you?
Well, I think there are different groups of people that you work that I started making contact with. There were the people who were formerly incarcerated who had experienced themselves. They are often a little bit leery of new people coming in, wanting to know what's your game here, what are you trying to do. That's a process where it takes a lot of building of trust and showing that you're following, not trying to lead. There are organizations who my fear was that there were going to be a lot of different people working on this issue and there wouldn't be a place for me. And I quickly understood there were not a lot of people working on this issue, almost none. And if you were willing to put some work in, you could quickly be a leader in on the issue. And then there were the institutional Georgia Department of Corrections, jails, sheriffs, uh, that make it very difficult to do this kind of work. They are difficult partners to work with. The reason that you have not thought about women giving birth behind bars is not an accident. It's not an accident that people don't think about this. It is by design that people do not think about this. They are anxious not for these stories to get out about how women are treated when they are pregnant and giving birth. So I am never surprised that when I come to talk to people about pregnancy and birth in carceral settings, that this is the first time they've thought of it. And I certainly don't judge them for it because um, we've we've designed a system that thrives on these stories being kept in the dark.
Right. It's such a important point on that. There's different constituencies, different people, and you're going to have these different reactions. Because I assume if you just started talking with the law enforcement or the prison system, it would have been pretty discouraging versus
Mhm.
realizing you're going to get different responses from different groups as you're
Mhm.
diving in and trying to figure out this issue. And it makes sense. Like, doesn't it's not the most positive PR story to be thinking, about people in prison having, these major life events that most of us have very positive associations with giving birth and like some of the happiest moments of our life. And that contrast, it's just hard to think about, really.
Mhm. It is.
So tell us about the point you've moved to Georgia, you've started working on getting legislative change happening in the state, and then how you got involved with Motherhood Beyond Bars, and then what led to you now as the executive director.
Sure. So I moved to Georgia, started looking for people that were doing this work, and started working on the legislation with Pamela Wynn. And one of the names that kept coming up was a woman named Bethany Kotler with and Motherhood Beyond Bars. And so naturally, I reached out to her, and I even found an NPR news article that talked about childbirth education happening in a prison in Georgia, and obviously reached out to Bethany, who really is the founder of Motherhood Beyond Bars. Now, the way this happened is a little convoluted. She was a student, a dual degree student at Emory School of Public Health and the Divinity School. So she went in getting a dual degree, and as part of the Candler School of Theology, they place students in what they call contextual education environments. And she was placed in the prison in Georgia where all pregnant women are held. Georgia gets this right. They really do. They put all of the women in a smaller facility that always has medical staff there. And she walked in to do her con ed and realized that there were a lot of pregnant women there. They were getting constitutionally mandated health care, but there was no education component. There was no childbirth, there was no pregnancy education. And she was perfectly placed. Again, she was a student in the public health and the Candler School of Theology. So, as part of her public health degree, she decided to write a curriculum, a childbirth education curriculum for these women. And the program was, she ended up dropping the divinity degree, staying with the public health, and graduated, but kept doing it. So there was Bethany and a little group of volunteers, not a lot of institutional support, but this little band of volunteers just kept going back into prison. And that was really important because they started to develop a relationship with the Georgia Department of Corrections as this group that was providing a service that the Georgia Department of Corrections found useful. And they expanded the programs to do a postpartum support group. I arrived in Georgia ready to get shackling laws passed and see where I could be helpful, and reached out to Bethany. And it had not been, it had been just a couple of months before that Bethany had found out a dream of hers was coming true. She had been offered a position at Harvard School of Public Health in their maternal health program and an opportunity to begin her PhD work. Really with a focus on incarceration and pregnancy. That's what she wanted to study. But she was afraid that when she went to Massachusetts, this little program, this little band of volunteers would just dissipate, and that would be that. And here I was, fresh from Washington, D.C., with a lot of fire in my belly, wanting to have a doula program for women in prison. And I realized that if I was going to get into the Georgia Department of Corrections, calling myself Motherhood Beyond Bars versus Amy Ard was a smart move because they already knew Motherhood Beyond Bars. And so Bethany and I agreed that it was time to make this an organization, a real one, a 501c3 nonprofit. And she kind of handed her baby over to me. It was the shortest job interview of my life. I think we were eating salad while that all went down, and I kind of walked away with a nonprofit, or one that I needed to form. But it already had some really important things in place, and that was a relationship with the Georgia Department of Corrections, programs that were already existed, and a real opportunity to grow. And so I was lucky in a lot of ways. I mean, I think everything about what has happened with Motherhood Beyond Bars is signs that there's like something bigger at work, or there's some kind of synchronicity in the world. But that's how a little group of volunteers turned into a nonprofit. And that was in 2017. In 2018, we were formed as an official nonprofit with a board of directors, and we've continued to grow since then.
That's great. Well, and then I love about your story is how you go out looking to solve this problem and you find the other people working on it. And together you're able to actually build something even bigger than either one of you guys started out trying to do. Uh,
Mhm.
so tell me about what's happened since, since you've become a official nonprofit, you've started fundraising, you've started, you changed the law in your state, but tell us about how it's grown and what's happened since then.
I would say my advice for any nonprofit organizer or director is to embrace change and to stay curious. And so that's my preemptive strike to tell you a little bit about what's happened since then. So in 2018, our programs continued to expand. We did prenatal yoga. We had a monthly baby shower for women in prison. It was the funniest baby showers in the world. I was the only person not pregnant at every baby shower. There was a room full of pregnant women, and it gave us an opportunity to provide really a healthy meal to women in prison. What they are served on a daily basis does not meet the requirements for um, good meals for pregnant people. We continued our weekly prenatal education and a weekly postpartum support group, which is what I facilitated. We can talk a little bit about the process of pregnancy and birth in Georgia, but women stay pregnant in one facility, have their baby in a hospital, and then are transferred directly to the largest women's prison in the state. And that's about an hour and change away from Atlanta. So I would travel there to do the postpartum group. And we had ideas about what a postpartum group should look like and the kinds of health information that we should be imparting to women about what's normal, what's not in the postpartum period, and a parenting class. And I remember walking into prison for the first time, a prison that big, and sitting down in a room that looked like a typical classroom in a school setting. There were boards up on the wall and desks and chairs. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I had 10 minutes probably worth of postpartum health that I wanted to get across. And I was reminded again that I am not an expert, that the people sitting in front of me are experts. And I started to listen, and I started to ask them stories, and I started to um, let them lead that postpartum support group with some gentle guidance and making sure that we were continuing to get some important health information across. And the things that I started to hear in that postpartum group really transformed the work of Motherhood Beyond Bars. The things that they were telling us, the women themselves were telling us they needed. And there were two things that really stood out as I continued to listen. One was that they were very concerned about their newborns and about their children. In Georgia, women identify a caregiver, the person that's going to come to the hospital to pick up their newborn once they've left and are back in prison. And most of those people are family members or a friend. And those people arrive at the hospital and pick up a baby, and then they walk out. And there is no state agency, there was no organization, there was no social worker that followed up with those people and made sure that they were doing okay and they had what they needed to safely care for that child. The mothers were talking to the caregivers, and over time, I would hear stories about babies not getting their diapers changed, and having really bad diaper rashes. And this would really, really bother the mothers in prison. It was heartbreaking to them to think that their children were suffering, and they felt helpless. They couldn't send money out to their caregivers. They could hardly, you can't just pick up the phone and wire money out. It's impossible. And I started to hear about there was a lot of animosity between the women in prison that was building up in the caregivers. And so that relationship was getting frayed. And then most troubling, I started to hear stories about babies being passed around. So a caregiver would get overwhelmed, and the mother would say, and then they went and they left the baby with a babysitter for 4 days because they just needed a break. And in some of the most troubling cases, I would hear about children now living with strangers, someone that the mother didn't even know. And it occurred to me at one point that I think I was the only person in the state of Georgia that knew where these children were from week to week, because I was
Wow.
sitting with the women and I was asking. And it also occurred to me that I couldn't do much about it at that moment, because the rules of the Georgia Department of Corrections are that if you walk into a facility, you can have no contact with family members on the outside. And this was an important rule, and one that I knew if I broke, I wouldn't be able to walk in the prison anymore. Now, the second thing that women in prison told me that they wanted was someone to help them once they came out of prison, reunify with their children, and reunify with the caregiver. In most cases, that was a family member. And I also couldn't do that because the rules of the Georgia Department of Corrections are that if you work with women inside, you may not work with them when they come out. And we were really stymied by these rules. And it so happens that at the end of 2019, we were working on getting a prison doula program together. And the Georgia Department of Corrections started to get pretty suspicious about, I think, what my motive and my motivations were. And I began to get pretty suspicious that at one day they weren't going to let me in the doors anymore. That our relationship was becoming quite tense, and there were about 6 different people at the Department of Corrections that I felt like I needed to make happy all the time. But I freaked right out because all of my programs depended on someone at the Georgia Department of Corrections letting me through those gates. And if that wasn't going to happen, then I needed to come up with other ways to solve this problem. We had focused all of our energy on creating programs inside prisons that really centered the identity of mother for women inside. But the women inside were telling me we need help on the outside. And again, 2020 rolls around and programs like ours were shut down across the country. So once COVID came, no volunteers were allowed inside the prisons. I never received notice from the Georgia Department of Corrections that I had a particular problem with them, but no volunteer programs were being let in. And it was only, I think, because we were, again, curious and very careful listeners that we were able to pivot our programs overnight. and developed these two programs that women had told us they wanted. And so in the beginning of 2020, we started reaching out to the hospital where all babies are born in Georgia, to the Department of Family and Children's Services to see what programs existed for these caregivers. And we realized pretty quickly that what the women had been telling us was right. There were no programs. And so we started one. And we now are able to identify and reach out to every single caregiver who comes to pick up a child at the hospital and take them home. And we have an infant and caregiver support program where we support the infant, the newborn, we support the caregiver, and we continue to provide support to the mothers and the pregnant women, although now we're only able to do that over an prison email system. So we're communicating over email. And we are learning a lot of really important information about how to support these families. And it really, I think, changed the core of our mission to breaking cycles of incarceration, because we know that the children who are born to women in prison are born with a deck stacked against them. They are more likely to end up in prison themselves one day just because they were born to a woman there. They are more likely to have problems in school. They are more likely to have substance abuse problems. And we know that we can start to see this even by the time the child is in preschool. That's the research shows some of those developmental delays due to the incarceration of a parent are obvious in preschool. But we believe that's too late to start a cycle, to start any interventions. And it's definitely too late if you wait to see them in third grade and then high school. So our program really intervenes from the moment of birth. And we believe that that's the time you have to start. And as far as I can tell, we are the only program in the country that does that. And we are starting to collect really important data, working together. And this is, again, the synchronicity of all of this with Harvard School of Public Health and Bethany and her research partners there, who we are gathering data on every caregiver and every infant and every mother with a longitudinal study with a series of interviews with those people that start to identify developmental delays in infants, caregiver mental health and stress, and reunification rates with the mothers. And this will be really important research. We're in the data collection phase now, and I sometimes just kind of sit back and marvel that we ended up where we did, but it was a journey, and it wasn't easy either. Like it wasn't, it wasn't easy to make those shifts, but the women were always leading us. It was always the women telling us what they needed and us really listening carefully.
That's so great. And I love how you found the solutions with the people you're trying to help. Like they already had some of these answers themselves, and you just mined it by talking
Mhm.
with them. Can you expand a little bit on the role diapers play in your process and what you guys do with that?
Again, I mean, I mentioned sitting in the postpartum group, I heard over and over again, my baby's got a diaper rash and, my mom isn't changing her diaper enough. And, sitting as a person that's had 3 children in that support group, and always having a supply of diapers on hand and always having access to more if I needed them, it didn't make any sense to me that these babies would have as many diaper rashes. And then they started to talk about the lack of funds. So it wasn't that the caregivers didn't want to change the baby's diaper, it's just that diapers are expensive.
Right.
And I remember that from buying diapers for 3 kids. And so as we decided we were building the program, we're also very, very careful about asking people to enroll in a program, what's in it for them, right? We are very interested in collecting this data. It's important for policy change, but it is a time commitment for the families that we're hoping to enroll in our caregiver program. And it became obvious from listening that diapers were going to be a really important hook for a lot of these families. And we make a commitment from the minute they leave the hospital that for every single family, we will send you a monthly supply of diapers. And we've raised funds to do that. We talk a lot about diapers. I've had people tell me, stop focusing on the diapers so much. I mean, I do need to raise the money for these diapers. But the people are right. What we're doing is not raising money for diapers. We are raising money to make sure that these families remember that we are here and continue to make contact with us so that we can then offer a lot of other services other than diapers. So we don't send diapers without talking to you because we don't want to send you the wrong size diaper. So every month we're reaching out at least once a month to each one of these caregiver families, checking in, asking a whole host of other questions about how the family is doing, important questions about how they're communicating with the mother inside prison. We're delivering child and infant mental health information, developmental milestones, communication patterns with the mom. We're beginning the process of reunification planning from day one. Not waiting until the prison gates open up and the mom comes out. That's a terrible time to start planning for how that's going to happen. But the diapers get us in the door every single time. And we also know it's just a critical supply. If you have a baby, you need
Right.
diapers, and diapers are not covered by WIC, food stamps, any of the social service programs. They always come out of pocket.
It's such I think, a unique way you've figured out how to both help, but also how to find out more information that you need, and I I don't ever remember when we had our own kids, you never turn down diapers because you always need
True.
more. Um,
Mhm.
One of the stories that stuck with me hearing your pitch was when you were meeting with a group of women and you had in the prison and you were asking them about their family and prison. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. We would always start our postpartum support group with a circle of highs and lows for the week. What was your high for the week since the last time we were here? What was your low? And we got around to one woman, and there were already tears in her eyes. And it was her baby's first birthday. She had been in our group for a while. I never kick anyone out of our postpartum support group. You could have a 3-year-old and still be in there. But it was her child's first birthday, and she was really struggling with what she was able to send out to her child to celebrate the birthday. And then she started talking about a bracelet that was her most prized possession when she was growing up. And it was made out of Starburst wrappers. And the Starburst candy wrappers had been folded in a way that made a bracelet. And she remembered that that's what her mother had sent her on one of her birthdays, and that she slept with it under her pillow. And it just became, I mean, I just get emotional talking about it. It just became her most precious thing. And um, and here she was, like having a child whose first birthday, and she was not able to get a hold of Starburst wrappers to do the same thing. Didn't know how to make it. And after we had supported her and started thinking about ways that she could mark that birthday, and we actually came up with keeping a journal for that child so that she could write the journal over time. And the 1-year-old, it was not going to mean a lot to the 1-year-old as a 1-year-old, but it was probably going to mean a lot to that child as a 7 or 8-year-old to know that even when he was 1, his mom was thinking about him every single day. And then I asked, so she had a mom that was in prison when she was a little girl. How many of you had a mom or dad in prison? And there were 14 women in that circle that day, and 13 hands went up. And that was, again, just one of those aha moments. I thought, we have a whole circle of women that have just delivered a baby, and they had a parent in prison. And how many generations back does this go? Like, how many of those people had parents that were involved in were behind bars? And that was when we talk about cycles of incarceration in families, I can really tie it to that one little experience of a Starburst bracelet, and realizing that these women, if we are going to be successful in breaking this cycle, we've got to find their children. It's not just about what happens in this prison, it's what happens outside with their children. and who was supporting them. And everyone I asked, the answer was not us. No one was reaching out to them. No one had a cycle of intervention that I thought started early enough.
Wow. That's such an incredible story. And thank you for sharing that, Amy.
And the day I stop getting emotional about it would be the day I need to stop, move on to something else.
Yeah, I'd imagine that's a hard story not to get emotional about. You think about that in contrast with your own kids and their first birthdays, and it's tough. And you
Mhm.
realize what difficult life, these children have, and but that also like their parents had as well.
Mhm.
Um, so, obviously this is the Seven Figure Fundraising Podcast. We talk about fundraising. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how, you went from founding this, nonprofit with your friend, and then what was the fundraising dynamic like, and how was it asked those first few meetings where you asked for money?
One of the benefits I think we have is that this is a topic that not many people have ever thought of before. And when they do hear about it, they want to do something about it because it is grim and it's a,
Right.
um, and the smart part about moving to back home to Atlanta was that I had people that had already spent their careers raising money for lots of good causes. I knew a lot of those people, and I started telling a lot of stories. I will never turn down an opportunity to talk about this topic. I mean, it has to be an awfully inconvenient time for me to not talk about this because I found that the more I talked about it and the more I humanized women and children and these caregivers, and you understand the scope of the problem, people really do want to do something. Now, we were a scrappy organization. I didn't pay myself for the first year. I paid, I had to drive to prisons. And this is an interesting dynamic because the organization has grown in such a way that our staff time and our resources, and it's just exponentially different than it was when we started. When we started, I drove to prison, I delivered 2 hours of material and education and support. I walked out. I couldn't bring anything into the prison with me, so there wasn't a lot of overhead. And then I would go out and I would try to change laws and talk to people, but it was very low overhead. And when 2020 rolled around and I found myself running pretty much a full service um, social work agency, things have really shifted. And we're going to need to raise a lot more money because 50 to 70 babies are born in the Georgia prison system every year. We now have about 21 families. One went home yesterday. So we have a brand new family enrolled. And the numbers are just going to keep rolling. And we will need staff to keep up with them. Otherwise, these families will fall through the cracks. And diapers are expensive. So we'll need to raise money. But I continue to tell the story. And I think we've had a lot of success in humanizing the issue. And I'm very careful about using specific women's stories. I get a lot of people say, well, we need the women. We need to see the women. We need to hear their stories. They need to tell us their stories. I really resist that. 90% of these women are victims of trauma. And what we know about trauma now is that every time you tell your story, it's re-traumatizing. It's not healing. I went into this actually not understanding that, and thinking that women talking about what happened to them would be part of their healing process. And I've learned enough to know that that's not true, not without a lot of help. And so I'm very hesitant to parade the women and the families that we work with out to tell their story. And that I know people respond with dollars when you do that. People like to see where their money is going. And so then I have to be careful in explaining to funders why I don't do that and why there's a compelling reason why that is not a good idea. But I try to respectfully and honestly tell the stories that I can tell, and understanding that at some point, the women that we work with will be in a position to tell their own stories. But I need to help give them the resources to make that truly a healing process for them and not re-traumatizing. Um, so raising money Raising money is always tricky. And I dropped out of Girl Scouts because hated selling Girl Scout cookies. Like, I am not a born fundraiser. I I think I just have a lot of heart for the program, and I do a decent job of communicating why it should matter to other people. And so far, that's been a pretty compelling message. And we have family foundations that have joined us. We have a lot of individual donors who are committed. And the more I talk about it, the more people want to help.
That's so great. And I love the fact how you're so careful and so intentional about not bringing out the stories of the people you help, when it, could be detrimental. Because, like you said, it would be the easiest stories in the world to be talking about. Um, and I really respect that, that you do that, Amy. What advice would you give to people starting out, starting their own nonprofit and struggling to raise money and kind of getting through this initial phase where you're going from low overhead to overhead?
Mhm. There are a lot of ways to create change and to change people's lives, and not all of those are very expensive. Um, I think I mentioned this in an earlier conversation. What I was most struck with in prison sometimes was that it was the simplest act of kindness that really seemed to make a difference. And so if you are starting out to solve a really big problem, start with simple acts of kindness and see where that leads you. When we were able to bring in on Mother's Day, we were able to have a Mother's Day party in our postpartum support group for the women there. And we put together hygiene kits. We put together, and I made sure the soap was nice. Like, it wasn't Dollar Tree soap. We had nice soap. And included in the package was toilet paper, because women are not given toilet paper in prison. The stories I could tell you about what happens inside is horrifying, but suffice to say, there's not toilet paper. There's not enough of it. And we put in toilet paper, and I hadn't thought much about it, but I got the toilet paper at the store that I liked. And it was the most popular thing. They still talk about the toilet paper. They held it like a newborn baby. And that simple act of kindness was really transformative. And it did not cost us a lot. And it built a lot of goodwill and a lot of trust. And, in a program budget line, I don't imagine that there are very many program budgets that include nice toilet paper. It was a really good place to start with it for us. So keep it simple, and believe that over the course of time, if you are doing simple things that build trust, that over time you can grow to much larger things that actually create change.
It's such a great answer, and so easy to, like, be dismissive instead of curious on those, like, little things, like, oh, that won't matter that much, when it matters a whole lot. I
Mhm.
think it's such a great example. So what's next for Motherhood Beyond Bars? Where are you guys going, and what's the big vision?
We got to hire some people. Like, we got to hire some people. This is not the Amy Ard show. We we have I do I because I believe that this whole thing has evolved in a way, and at every step of the way, in the way that it needed to. I also believe that what we are learning about caregivers' experiences and what the needs are, and how this can transform the work that we're doing, can transform generations of families. um, I'm very, very committed to the caregiver program and the reentry program. And that means that we will probably not go back into prisons again, even once COVID is over and they allow volunteer organizations back in. That's going to need to be somebody else's job. And we will certainly provide support for those organizations. But it also means that I am thinking about our work differently. I really am thinking about it as a social work agency. And it would be, if someone had told me 6 months ago I would be running a social work agency, I would have told you it was impossible. And it turns out it is impossible. We just happen to be doing it right now. But as the numbers grow, we will need staffing, and that just means we need money. But right now, I think doing the work is good proof of the need for the work, and that the money, as long as we continue to be strategic about who we're reaching out to, um, that it will follow. And just to, again, continue to talk about our work, because every time we talk about it, so it seems that good things follow. And that is, it's not a very strategic answer. I mean, do I know that we're going to end up with, a $500,000 grant that helps me hire 2 or 3 program directors? No, I don't. And am I doing everything in my power to make sure that happens? No, because I got 4 programs to run and a Origami Heart fundraiser on February 14th, which, if this podcast comes out before then, everyone needs to sign up for our Origami Heart fundraiser. Just go to our website, you'll find it. Those are, there's the day to day is sometimes keeps you from thinking about big picture, but I believe we're doing the things we need to get it done.
Well, I think you have, from hearing your pitch and hearing all your plans, even now in this interview, I think you're going to get there. And it's what I love about talking with you, Amy, is how much when you meet a challenge, you just figure out a way around it or figure out a way to make it an advantage. And, a lot of nonprofits could have been in your situation and hibernated during COVID because they couldn't get into prisons anymore. And I think it's a real testament to how much you and your team care about this issue and care about, helping these women and these families, that you've been so adaptive in such a challenging year.
We do a lot of leaping and then looking around. And usually there's good ground underneath us. So it's like I said, it's been kind of a lifelong challenge for me to slow my roll. But in this situation, the leaping has worked.
Well, it seems to be working really well. So what advice would you give, like through the ups and downs of the last year, other nonprofit leaders running startup nonprofits, or just in the challenging time? What advice you'd give for getting through those difficult periods?
Coordinate with others. So take the time to understand who's doing work, which even at first blush may not be exactly in line with what you're doing. There are organizations out there that might be able to to lift some of your load, or might be interested in combining forces. One of my frustrations, I think, in the nonprofit world is that everyone wants to stake their own territory, and we get there's founder syndrome. And I know enough about myself to know that I'm susceptible to that. But we will truly go further by working together. So let go of some ego and find people that are doing good work and see how you can work together. And that's, I'm working on that too. But there are a lot of people that are working, we work both with families, we work in the maternal health world, we work in childbirth support. So this morning I was in a meeting of doulas in the state of Georgia who are not specifically working in prisons and jails, but are really interested in maternal health. And in the process of just being on that call today, a call that I almost didn't attend because I had some other things going on and I found some really interesting connections with people who I think are going to be able to help us move our program forward. So collaborate beyond your small scope, find a big picture, find people that are even tangentially related to what you're doing, and see if you can work together.
That's great, Amy. And I love how you're always staying curious, like even on the call, trying to figure out how to work together with those people. What's the one, we always like this show to be about people taking action and moving forward and bettering their nonprofit. What's the one thing you'd like our listeners to do when they get done listening to this episode?
Don't be overwhelmed by the tremendous amount of need that you see around you in the world. Think carefully about what you really have to offer, and almost like an arrow, almost with some amount of precision, look for an organization that is doing that work. It is so easy right now to be overwhelmed. If you pull up the news, if you scroll through Twitter, there is so much need in the world. There is so much sorrow and heartache. But we are not capable of, as human beings, of attending to all of that sorrow. But you have something. There is something that you bring to the world. There is some interest and burning desire that you have in some specific area. Focus there, because otherwise you get overwhelmed, um, and we start to be numb to the pain that we can fix. So for me, it was seeing a birth that was in conditions that I found unimaginable. And when I left the hospital that day, I probably passed 30 other people that were experiencing some terrible hardship that I probably should have noticed as well. But it was that one thing that aligned with something that I already knew something about and cared about, that um, that spoke really clearly to me, and that's what I followed. And change, making one small change in the world, it ripples out. You'll end up touching a lot more people than you think by being focused.
That's such great advice, Amy. And I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story and just sharing the amazing work you are doing and the change you're making. Where can people find out more about you and make a donation to Motherhood Beyond Bars?
That's Motherhood Beyond Bars. And I do, if someone would give me $1 for every time they said Motherhood Behind Bars, I wouldn't have to raise money anymore. But that has, I should set up like that tip jar, like the cuss jar where people,
Right.
the name of the organization was given to it by women in prison. So I have been very tempted to change it many times, but never have. And we have really grown into that name this year, obviously, as our programs have expanded beyond bars. Our website is motherhoodbeyond.org, and it is very easy to make donations there. We also have a Facebook page that's pretty active, Instagram, which I'm working on because I'm 47 and I'm trying to learn new things. We have a newsletter that you can subscribe to on our website. So there are those ways to be in touch. And my email is always a good place to start. If people want to reach out, have specific questions, amy@motherhoodbeyond.org is my direct email. And I love hearing from people and reaching out and figuring out ways we can join forces.
That's so great. And thank you for being on the show, Amy. It's been a pleasure talking to you and wish you all the success in the world this year. And hopefully, this is your best fundraising year ever.
Thanks so much, Trevor. It's really been a joy to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks.